And we're back with another ACA podcast made possible by Williamsville Wellness. I'm Billy Hoffman.
And I'm Stephen Smith, licensed professional counselor.
And what we're going to talk about today is ACA. That's why it's an ACA podcast. We had, in our last episode, we kind of did an overview. So you already know that Tony A. Was doing adult children of alcoholics around 1978. And he came up with what they call the laundry list. Mm-hmm. And the laundry list describes, basically some of the traits that you might pick up if you grew up in a dysfunctional family or if you grew up in a family with alcoholism or other addictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and today we're going to be doing a deeper dive, maybe as a part of a series of podcasts. And today we're going to be focusing on just the first couple of traits. In the last episode, we didn't talk that much about the laundry list in more detail, but I figured before we dive into trait one, we can start by talking about that. So the laundry list, if people want to look it up on their own, you can just find it on ACA's official website. It's broken down into two sides, the laundry list and then the other laundry list. And each of the sides of the laundry list basically cover just sort of different parts of the trait or different reactions within a similar theme. This will make a lot of sense, I think, as we start getting into examples and talking about them today. But you will often find that the laundry list trait is a behavior or a trait that we formed basically as an adaptation to something in our childhood. So something happened or there was something about our environment that we as children were like, well, I got to figure out how I'm going to survive this. I got to figure out how I'm going to get by. And the laundry list usually describes the trait that we formed as a response to that.
So it helped me.
Exactly. It helped me. It was what I needed to do at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other laundry list will often describe a behavior or a trait that we formed basically through observation. So every human being learns through what we see, and especially children do this. We observe what people do, and we learn that way. And so the other laundry list will often describe a trait that we observed people in our life growing up do, and we sort of unknowingly, and sometimes essentially against our best wishes, may have found ourselves recreating or doing in some way in our
So if what the people were doing was not all that great, then we learn how to operate like that in our own lives.
Exactly. I think that basically in the original other laundry list, when it was introduced, they describe it as like sort of unknowingly becoming our parents is how they would phrase it.
That makes sense.
And I think it's a little more nuanced than that, but that's the gist of it. We may touch on and talk a little bit about the flip side. So for each trait, there's a laundry list trait, the other laundry list trait, and then there's a flip side for each one. And if you look at the laundry list framework, the flip side will basically describe the recovery side of the trait. What does it look like to engage in some kind of healing from whatever this behavior is? And today we're going to be talking more about the laundry list and the other laundry list just to give people examples of how this stuff can look. Whereas we may not do as much of a deep dive on the flip side, but that's certainly something that I would encourage people to read if they want to look into this.
And of course, if we continue on the series, then at some point,
sure.
20 episode from now, we'll be on the flip side.
Yeah. And I should add too, before, as the last caveat, as we're talking about this, Billy and I, we run these groups. ACA is, I think, a very accessible material. It's open to a lot of interpretation. Lots of the examples and things that I'm going to share today are largely based on things that I've observed, things that I've heard people say. And then just sort of some examples of how this stuff can look, based on some of, my background and training. In particular, I'll probably bring in some discussion of, how trauma can impact people, especially childhood trauma. Everything I share today is by no means an exhaustive list. I'm not going to cover every single aspect of how this stuff can show up in adulthood. In fact, I think one of the things that I like about doing the groups is there's so much depth to it. There's going to be plenty of stuff that people can connect into that might not be stuff that I say today.
Right. So should we go ahead and get into the...
Yeah, sure.
Don't get old, Stephen. You're going to have to use these things. The laundry list, and this is trait one, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. So what have you seen in people
Sure.
With that?
So I think of trait one has a lot to do with and tends to speak towards households where there were really high conflict. And when I say conflict, this can mean things like arguments, yelling, screaming, physical conflict, domestic violence, physical abuse. It can be a sort of passive-aggressive style of conflict. There's not always a lot of yelling or screaming, but there's this constant sense of tension and anger throughout the household. People who grow up in households like that, that is overwhelming. It's overwhelming to be around. It's overwhelming to feel all the time. A lot of times people who grew up in households like that may have described a sense of as if they were sort of tiptoeing around things or always walking on eggshells is a common saying. And the laundry list trait, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures, tends to describe a response that people might form as a way to get by in that environment. If I'm a kid and I'm around this overwhelming sense of anger, aggression, conflict, it might involve me directly. It might have nothing to do with me, and I just watch it happen and I feel it. As kids, we don't have any ability. We can't set boundaries. Children are sort of naturally boundaryless, so all of that stuff just kind of filters in and comes right into me. And people who develop this trait often will be like, I hated it. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be around it. So they would find ways to withdraw or isolate themselves to protect themselves from whatever may have been going on. So this can be a very obvious physical isolation, like I closed myself in my room. I shut the door. I would never open it. I spent all my time up there. I hid in my closet. I hid under the covers. I spent as much time as I could outside of the home. I would never be within 10-mile radius if I didn't have to be. I would, stay after school doing as many sports as I could. I would spend time at other friends' homes. Any excuse I could be to be outside the home. And I'd say for kids who may have not been fortunate enough to either have had a place to go, or maybe they didn't have their own room, we can isolate and withdraw just within ourselves. So I may have been physically present. I might have been forced to be in the same room as the conflict, but I would just sort of emotionally shut down, emotionally withdraw within myself, and go to an internal place where I can just shut this all out.
Yeah, and you've heard me share in groups before. In my house, my father was very, very loud, and there was a lot of screaming. And in the 70s, I found a lot of the homes that I was in, whether it was a babysitter or what, the man of the house was often very loud, and the conflicts between, he and his wife would get very loud, where the wife is screaming too. And so when I was exposed to that, it did scare me. And like you said, I didn't want to be a part of it. I wanted to be away. I did stay in my room a lot. I found that I developed this passion for collecting. I would escape into collecting 45s or albums or whatever, and pay attention to these things, just finding a way to get away.
Yeah, any way we can get separation from it. It's like a child's attempt to create a boundary where we don't really have the ability to set one. Because like you said, it's overwhelming. And one of the things, or the ways that this can show up in adulthood, so that all might have happened in my childhood, but if I'm thinking I'm an adult now and I read this and I think, oh yeah, I can be a little afraid of authority figures. A lot of times how this shows up in adulthood, if I'm relating to the laundry list, is through a pretty intense fear of conflict. So anytime there's a situation where someone is maybe overtly angry at me, I don't know, someone dislikes...
Like my boss.
Yeah, like your boss.
So I see boss, and deep down inside, I'm processing dad.
Yeah.
Boss is here, but the dad feeling is still there.
Exactly. And that's just a really common thing, because we might not know, of course, in our head, or might not think I'm reacting to my dad, but this person is reminding me of that, and my brain and my emotions are just sort of automatically jumping back to this reaction, this habit that I've had since I was a kid, because as often is the case, like you said, they were helpful for us in childhood. I probably didn't have much of a choice. That was probably the best that a 6-year-old kid could cobble together, was any way he could escape. But now in adulthood, actually, there's more choice. There's more options available to us. We just haven't, practiced or connected with that yet.
And so often people will throw their hands up and just look at some of these things as, oh, well, this is just how I am.
Yep.
This is just how I am. This is just who I am. When really, it's how the child inside of me is.
Exactly.
That I have now taken into my adult body. And if I don't take the steps to change some of that, then I'm going to keep getting the same results.
Exactly.
So what are your suggestions for people when they come to this realization? Obviously ACA meetings are a great idea. Are there other things that you would...
Sure. So, the catch-all, and I would say to start with, check out ACA meetings, see a therapist, see someone who has some knowledge of family dysfunction, family systems. If they even list themselves as sort of an ACA-informed therapist, even better. But anyone who has some experience, especially also with the trauma lens, is likely going to have some knowledge of this stuff. That's the catch-all. On the personal level, I think that if people are beginning to notice these are things that I do, I suggest that people begin to have a sense of curiosity about your own reaction. If you can catch that, when someone, begins to have a type of conflict with me, I feel myself get really nervous and I want to just shut down or I want to leave the conversation. Try to start having a sense of curiosity, what's going on there? Why am I so afraid of this person? Maybe the person who is in front of me and is starting this conflict scenario has been really awful to me in the past. And maybe I have a good reason to actually be getting nervous. But if it's my boss and nothing bad has ever happened, it might tell me that, hey,
it's coming from somewhere else.
It's coming from somewhere else.
And the other thing I want to mention, because you mentioned it, if you are a therapist watching this right now and you're not an ACA-informed therapist, we would encourage you to become that.
Yes.
Because it will really help the work that you're doing as well.
Yeah, 100%. ACA on their website, actually, they list open meetings, and they'll mark open meetings as one that anyone can attend. They even recommend that they say on their website that many therapists have attended ACA meetings just to learn about them and become more informed. For actually both of these books I'm going to mention right now, I would say could be appropriate for anyone, people who want to learn from this or therapists. Terrence Real has written several books. He's a big proponent of ACA himself. His first book is I Don't Want to Talk About It. That one tends to resonate with a lot of men because it's written about male depression, but he talks a lot about how childhood can show up. And then there's another author, Lindsay Gibson, who writes Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which, pretty similar lens here. And so she offers another angle to understanding kind of how childhood stuff. So those are great resources to look into as well.
All right, should we get into step 2?
We got to do the other laundry list.
Look at me being the recovery guy. You want the other laundry list first?
Yeah, let's talk the other laundry list on trait 1.
All right, to cover our fear of people and our dread of isolation, we tragically become the very authority figures who frighten others and cause them to withdraw.
Yes. So this one fits right in with the theme. So again, to cover our fear of people and our dread of isolation, we tragically become the authority figures. So this is an example of us sort of unknowingly recreating the patterns that we may have experienced. So let's say perhaps I experienced a caretaker or a parent who was very angry all the time, would lash out at people, could be very verbally abusive or aggressive in any kind of way. As a kid, I may have been terrified of that. I may have even grown to resent that. I really may have hated that I was treated that way. And yet, I still may find that in my adulthood, I can be someone who can lash out at other people. I often hear people who relate to the other laundry list side describe themselves as sort of having a short fuse, being very easily triggered into an anger or explosive outburst. And may even find that in those moments that other people, usually the people closest to them are the ones who see this, can be a little frightened of that.
And, I could definitely see where somebody might take on an attitude of, hey, this is how it was done to me, so this is
Yeah.
this is how I do it.
Exactly. It might not even register as something that's out of the norm. But I would say equally as common to that are a lot of really well-meaning people who may even have swore to themselves, I'm never going to be like my dad. And so the other laundry list, I think, is really challenging, and it's a very vulnerable thing for people to really do some self-reflection and allow themselves to take accountability for the ways that they may be similar, because many of those people probably hated the fact that it was so, angry, or there's so much conflict, and they do have to reckon with the fact that, hey, some part of me doesn't want to do this. I don't like the fact that I'm this way, but some part of me did see that, and it does live within me, and it's kind of up to me to actually be more aware of that and actually take accountability for the ways that it slips out.
It's almost comfortable because I'm used to this.
Yeah.
So there's a certain comfort in it, maybe.
And I think the last piece I'll add on this is, it says to cover our fear of people. There's a protective element to this. I'm going to get upset at them and get angry with them before it gets too close to me. It may even be like, because I'm so afraid of conflict, or I'm so afraid of something, I'm going to be the one who starts it so that I don't have to, be overwhelmed with it as I was in my childhood. It's coming from a protective place, but it ultimately results in me kind of doing pretty similar things to what was done to me.
Yeah, if I get you on your toes, then you're put in that defensive position, and I, I feel like I might have a little power over you in that situation, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so trait 2. It says, we became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. And you've heard me in groups talk about how, I learned that performing, making people laugh, singing to people, whatever I had to do could calm, my house down sometimes. And then I love the attention too, so that approval seeking thing stayed with me for a long, long time. Again, with a lot of the laundry stuff, it wasn't until I got into recovery for gambling, and I also stopped drinking and using drugs, all of that stuff. But the recovery piece of that helped me, find ACA, where I learned where some of these behaviors were coming from.
Sure.
So approval seeking, how much do you see that?
It's all over the place. Traits 1 and 2, it's fitting that we're starting with them, but they're kind of, they're all kind of big hitters, but trait 2 is one that I find people relate to a lot. It's interesting to me, trait 2, because in some ways, some of the things that we just talked about in trait 1 sometimes are the very same things that might lead a different person to respond by developing trait 2. So the approval seeking and lost their identity in the process. A lot of times people who relate to this trait will have a sense that it's very important to me that other people like me. Or maybe even if not that, it really makes me very anxious and upset when I know that people do not like me. And so they're very sensitive to that, and will often find themselves going through a lot of effort to basically gain the approval, respect, likability of other people. Whether that's, I need to be an overachiever, go above and beyond, and do everything to be the most well-liked person, or I need to use humor. I need to be the one who makes anyone laugh and eases the tension.
Check and check.
Well, there you go.
Continue.
Or even just like, I'm going to figure out exactly what this person thinks, feels, wants, and I'm going to basically mold whatever my opinion, my thoughts, my feelings are to match theirs, because I know that if it's theirs, then we'll probably get along in some way. All of those things are sort of safety-seeking mechanisms, because what trait 2 is often formed in response to is actually a similar kind of conflict, tension, dysfunction kind of stuff in the home. So people who identify with trait 2 often may have felt like they were sort of the peacekeepers in the home. They might have been the one who expressly mediated between people. Maybe they got between mom and dad and tried to calm things down. Maybe they mediated between one of their siblings and a parent who was always after them. They might have been the one who, at the dinner table, when everything was really tense and they could feel the tension, they might crack a joke, because if I could get dad to laugh, then everyone would breathe a sigh of relief.
Right.
Or, anytime mom went through one of her depressive episodes or was in her active addiction phase, I would see her get really out of shape, and I thought, I need to go tell her something that I did at school to make her proud of me. Or I need to basically boost her mood, because if I don't, then this whole household's going to fall apart. They're the kids who tried to fill in the gaps, supported wherever they could, and often have a really strong sense of anxiety beneath that. Their feeling is, if I don't do something to keep the peace, then this whole thing's going to fall apart, or the roof's going to blow up and people are going to all be angry. I think this is very true for anyone who grew up with any ACA stuff, but a lot of people who relate to trait 2, I think, are people who would maybe see themselves as, or maybe be seen by others as, very perceptive or very empathetic people. They will be able to perceive the emotional state of other people and are sort of often, as a default mode, looking for how they can respond or adjust their behavior accordingly.
And when all that stuff is going on, the childhood portion of that, it feels completely normal to that person. Yeah. That this is what they're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to fill in the blanks and help the family and be that person in the family.
Yes. Oh man, I'm gonna forget his name. There's a child psychiatrist, Frank something. I wish I could remember his name. But he has a quote that I really love that says, kids will take responsibility for things that are 100% of the time. And so this sense of no one else at the dinner table would ever de-escalate emotions. They wouldn't take responsibility for their anger or their emotional instability, dysfunction. They weren't doing that. So this poor kid was. This kid said, I'm going to try to keep the peace. And sometimes the approval seeking would be like, I need to get positive attention on me. But it can sometimes also look like that I'm going to just sort of smooth things over in the household too.
It's a hard way to grow up.
It is. It is a tough one. There are other traits that we'll talk about in future podcasts that kind of connect to this. But if people have ever described themselves as a people pleaser, for folks who like or might use the codependence label, trait 2 is often very similar. It's close to what we're talking about there.
Plus, I'm nice, I'm friendly, I do things for others.
Yeah.
First of all, let's just say there's nothing wrong with doing nice things for others. However, when it basically takes away all of your energy and you feel compelled to do it or else, that's what we're talking about.
Sure.
That's what we're talking about. It doesn't mean that if you help somebody by getting them coffee, that you're this, you had this childhood that was all of these things that we just talked about. But if that's kind of the way you do most things, then there probably is some of that. And really, if you're watching this and if you're relating to any of it, you know that it's there.
Sure.
It's just a matter of being open and honest about that so that you can do something about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, is we can ask ourselves, if I find myself doing this and I might be wondering, hey, well, I try to do things for people, does that mean this? You might ask yourself, do I feel compelled to do this? Is this coming from a place of, I feel like I need to do this? Do I feel like an underlying sense of fear of something that will happen if I don't? Those are good questions that we can ask ourselves, or talk about with other people that might give us some insight into whether it's coming from some childhood stuff.
All right. So as I said, I'm Billy Hoffman, and this is.
Are we going to do
more?
Are we going to do the other laundry list? Or are we out of time?
Oh, I don't know. Are we? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I think we can get this much time in. The other laundry list for trait 2 says, to avoid becoming enmeshed and entangled with other people and losing ourselves in the process, we become rigidly self-sufficient and we disdain the approval of others.
Yes. This is the other side of the coin to the becoming approval seekers. This is the person who said, there was all this dysfunction in my household, whether it was conflict, tension, anger, violence, whatever. But my caretakers were so lost in their emotional issues, active addiction or not, that I learned that I cannot depend on anyone else to meet my needs. And basically, they said, well, it's just going to be me. I'm going to have to meet all of my needs from here on out. And they decided that that's the way it's just going to be. They're probably going to identify as people who don't really feel like they need a lot of help from other people. They're going to feel like, yeah, it's just sort of what's expected of me to handle it all on my own. They might struggle to ask for help from other people.
Take pride in being a loner.
Yes, they might take pride in being independent. They're probably going to have a sense of feeling like that. And there may be actually a sort of fear of closeness that they may have. And this is tough because people don't automatically relate to that when I say that. But to put it another way, if I grew up in that household that I just described, my template for what closeness in love means is if I get close to this person, they're going to have all of their emotions and all of their dysfunction, whether it's addiction or not, and their issues are going to take center stage. And I'm going to have to be now responsible for their stuff, and they're not going to care about me at all. In fact, they're not going to be able to take care of me. And if that's my template, then I don't want to touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole. I don't know how to fix their stuff. I'm a kid. I just want to stay over here and make sure I don't make anything worse, and I'm going to try to take care of me, and that's all I'm going to do. And so, people who relate to the other laundry list side of this often, feel or look very functional in a capacity in adulthood, but they may have people in their lives describe them as very unemotional. Like they keep themselves. They don't tell other people what's going on with them. They certainly struggle to ask for help. And the rigidly self-sufficient is the key part. It's that I never ask for help. So that's kind of the other laundry list side in a nutshell.
All right, so can we do the official ending now?
I think we can do the official ending.
All right, so I'm Billy Hoffman, and this is Stephen Smith. We are both with Williamsville Wellness. You can find us in Hanover, Virginia, and there's all kinds of stuff online. So we'll see you in the next ACA podcast.